Good morning, and welcome to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm glad you've made the connection and are with us today. I'm Laurie Fitz, your host, and the goal of our show is to explore a wide range of topics that challenge us to see ourselves, our community, and the world around us in ways that get us thinking, maybe get us talking a little bit more, get us connected, and perhaps inspired or challenged to do just a bit more because we've made the connection. This morning's co-host and co-producer is Malissa Staten Adams. She's the president and executive director of the Staten Adams Diversity Institute. And if you were with us last week, you'll know that we've been last week we had a conversation. We had Melissa as my co-host and co-producer. And we've been talking about the Derek Chauvin trial. We've been debriefing, and we've been opening up the conversation for folks to call in. And we're continuing our conversation today. So welcome, Melissa. I'm so glad that you're joining me again today for us to talk about this.
Good morning, Laurie, and I'm always excited to be here with you on Connections Radio. We have such great conversations.
Yeah, and we have fun prepping for the show, too.
Yes, we do.
And I have to admit that this last week when we did our final prep for the show, it was while I was in the car with my husband and his daughter. We were going to get the Janssen one and done vaccine for both of them. I've had at least my first Pfizer, but I won't get my second Pfizer till the end of the month. But we were going downtown, and so I wanted to get the prep in. And so, Melissa, thank you for your patience as we talked in the car while driving down to Minneapolis.
No worries. I had a great conversation with you and with your husband.
Yeah, well, you got Jeff going. He's kind of a behind-the-scenes kind of a guy, but you really opened him up and got him going in the conversation as well, which was great.
Well, I could see us sitting around a bonfire with a couple of drinks and just really having a great conversation. So I would love to hang out with you and Jeff out once COVID is completely over.
We'll do that.
You know,
we will do that. You'll come out to the farm, you and Cecilia, and we'll have a great time. But I also wanted to say that the shots went really well. The convention center, the Minneapolis Convention Center, does an amazing job. And I promised to do a shout out to Catherine, who gave my husband the shot. Catherine was fabulous. She was a wonderful educator, delightful, and she said she might be listening. So, Catherine, if you're listening, thank you. And thank you to all of the health providers that are giving shots and caring for COVID patients. You're our heroes, and we love you for it. And Catherine, if you feel like calling in, we are going to be doing a calling in in the second segment on. And the number for everyone is 952-946-6205. And to remind our audience, last week, the first Saturdays of the month, we are doing a deep dive into the Racial Healing Handbook, and that's by Annalise Singh. And we were looking into Chapter 2, which is exploring your internalized racism. And we're going to continue to do that today. We're going to examine what internalized racism is about. We're also going to be looking at an unconscious and conscious bias. And one of the things that is the premise for our shows when Melissa and I do our shows together is that racism impacts us all. And racism can be hard to talk about. And white people especially seem to be afraid about talking about racism. And I think it's because we have fears about saying the wrong thing, or we don't want to exhaust the person of color with questions or expectations that they're supposed to educate us. But what I want to have the audience know is Melissa wants to be your friend. You know, she essentially wants to be a person that if you have questions, if you want to call in today and talk about your feelings about the Chauvin trial, any aspect of the trial, or you want to ask Melissa about her feelings and context for you to better understand how racism impacts each other, Melissa wants to do that. That's been her mission. I remember talking to her once about, how some individuals can feel burdened by, white people constantly asking the question. And the response that you gave to me, Melissa, was so powerful. It's about grace. It's about taking the moment and having grace in a really, authentic conversation.
Yes. Laurie, I also tell people What if Dr. King said, I am just tired of being burdened by white people asking me questions about race.
Hmm.
I also am tired of what's going on, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm going to perhaps sit back at home with my family and watch the world, destruct before my very eyes. If Dr. King would have had that mentality, I don't know where I would be today. So I think of it in terms of paying homage to Dr. King. Dr. King spoke truth to power. Dr. King educated people about race and racism, and he gave his life so that I could, have the civil liberties that I do. So I take it in terms of that and try to help other people out as well so that I can, keep that legacy going.
Absolutely. And I deeply believe it's about having the conversations and having the difficult conversations, getting
Yes.
comfortable with being uncomfortable. It doesn't all fall out nicely. There are things
Yes.
that are difficult to talk about, but you can do it when you're talking with a friend. And
That's right. And you have to build friendships, right?
mhm,
And I think our listeners have seen how close our
yes,
relationship has become over the course of COVID-19. We've been doing our show. We've been doing all of these shows, and between doing the shows we meet, and our relationship is growing. You're a white woman, I'm a black woman, and we're able to build a stronger relationship just by connecting with one another. Obviously, we share stories.
yeah.
You've told me stories about what it was like for you growing up. I've told you stories of what it was like for me growing up. And it's not that we're comparing stories or anything like that. We're sharing stories.
And learning. And it becomes that opportunity. How can we, pause? And I think maybe COVID-19 has given us some luxury in taking a big
Yes.
pause and
Yes.
not and getting out of our comfort zone of our daily routine and trying to figure it all out. And figuring it all out is part of, you know, understanding our own story. And understanding our own story, we want to understand other people's stories. And it
Yes.
is the story that helps us connect, and it's the story that helps us um, get beyond ourselves and start to have more empathy and less judgment. And I think,
And I think it's vulnerability too.
yeah, yeah,
As we think about the folks who are witnesses at the Derek Chauvin trial, those people are putting themselves in a very vulnerable position
mm-hmm,
to I guess speak truth to power, right? You're sitting on the stand and it's being filmed and the world is watching, but they like I hate to jump into it, but there was someone who said, "Oh, the 911 operator."
yeah,
She said, "Call me a snitch if you want to,
right,
but there's something wrong here."
right. It was in her gut. I mean, she
Yeah.
goes, I can't explain it, but after years of experience, something wasn't right. And I think we all have
Yes.
that in us that when we know there is something not right, and sometimes we
Yes.
override it because we're in a hurry and you move on to the next thing. But how do we, in any situation where we're faced with racism, take a moment and go, something's not right here. I need to check in because this
Yeah.
doesn't seem
And you
right.
know what that is? You're questioning the system.
Right, right. Well, the system also, I think the defense attorney, and I'm bringing this up because I want to frame it for not only looking at discussing healing from racism, but also looking at unconscious and conscious bias. The
Yes.
defense attorney is clearly putting out some some call it tropes. I call it unconscious bias, calls to an unconscious bias. Here's a scary black man on drugs. He's obviously dangerous. There's this group that's scary and swearing, and the tensions were high, and it was really all their fault. And you look at another where here's this jovial, gentle giant, who an hour before was hugging and talking about baseball and football. And yeah, he had an addiction, but it was because it was more self-medication to deal with his pain. You look at that and go, wow, those are two very different views. One, I believe, much more empathetic to seeing this person as a person, and the other is just a label that calls up fears. And we're really asking people when we're healing from racism is to address our fears. You know, what are we afraid of? Why do we automatically assume that because he's tall, that, you know, and he's a big man and he's black, he's going to be scary and dangerous? I mean, Chauvin used the gun right away, knocking on the window without even asking anything about who he is and what's going on. Just assumes. And it's that assumption. Why do we I think there was more escalation there than de-escalation from the get-go.
Right.
And the
it's just
go ahead.
The torture.
Yeah.
It's the torture of the things that were done maliciously.
Well, they were done for power. I think they were done for power and control. I think they were done to show and we have to talk about white supremacy. There was this sense that he was going to be the big man there. And to be afraid of 12 people that included 3 teenage young women, and I'm going to call them children. They were 17, and a 9-year-old. So there's 4 young women plus a first responder who was there to offer medical attention. So you've got 5 out of the 12 are young women. So almost half. They were dangerous. These were women that were trying to save his life. And the fire woman that was there that was medically able to give attention, she was being completely shut out. You are, you know, basically we have this under control. You do not need to interfere with this. You should not be interfering. Totally blocking this woman's opinion and her abilities. And I know that there's a lot of women out there that have had that same feeling where they could make a difference. If they could just be heard, they could make a difference. Yes. And so half of these were women who were trying to help. Now, if a policeman can't handle, you know, half of a crowd that are young women that are trying to make a difference, I question whether or not he really is a peace officer.
Oh, and you bring up a great point, right? The peace officer. Are you a peace officer or a police officer? And, you know, are these officers actually, like you said, Laurie, did he come to diffuse the situation? Was he coming there to de-escalate the situation? From what it looks like was that he was the person who escalated the situation and caused everyone harm in the whole, like he caused so much trauma from one person's inaction or bad actions. We are all going through we're all going to need some racial healing after this. I was actually looking at something that said that the people of color who are journalists who are working the Chauvin trial are being emotionally drained by this, having to cover this.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it may not be healing for them right now. This may be yet another trauma. I mean, there may come a point where all of this becomes part of the healing process, but even the journalists are getting hit with the trauma of over and over and over again watching George lose his life in front of our eyes. Over and over.
And I think too, we talked earlier a little bit about me being everyone's friend, and I don't mind being everyone's friend. I feel like I was this is my calling, and I was called to do this work. But everyone is not called to do this work.
Right.
And for me, it's a form of resiliency. I practice self-care. I speak to a therapist. I do yoga. I try to eat right. I try to sleep right so that these things don't impact me as much as they impact others. But as I mentioned, I was called for this. So I have a special resiliency that I believe that I can take this type of stuff and not be as traumatized as others.
Well, and I think having a conversation. I mean, the reporters have to just keep reporting over and over again. I think the healing has to do with part of the respectful conversations that we can have with each other, especially cross-racial conversations. And how do we connect? And how it can be hard to talk about it, but how do we practice it over and over so that it's no longer as hard? So with that, I'm going to close out this segment because we're running over, of course, we always do. But when we come back, I want to open it up to the audience. We're happy to talk about any of the witnesses. Last week in particular, we talked about the witnesses that were there on the scene, and we can talk about them. We also, this last week, have had more of the law enforcement and the forensic specialists and the medical specialists. We can open up that conversation. Or you may have just a question for Malissa, whatever you want, or me, whatever. We're here to have a deeper conversation about racism and race. Melissa and I will just start talking. So you can call at any moment and interrupt the flow. Don't worry about that. Come with your questions. Come with your ideas. Come with what you've been learning through all of this, because we've all been impacted, and we want you to be part of the conversation. So stay with us. We'll be right back after just a few commercials. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show. I am your host, Laurie Fitz, and I have got a wonderful co-host and co-producer, Malissa Staten Adams, and she is the executive director and president of the Staten Adams Diversity Institute. And we're talking about the Derek Chauvin case. We're continuing our conversation from last week, and we're going to be continuing next week as well. So thank you, Malissa, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Laurie. I am so excited to be here. We always have great conversations, and we were talking about two topics kind of twined together like a ball. Mm-hmm. We're talking about racial healing. Mm-hmm. And then on the other hand, we're talking about the Derek Chauvin trial for the murder of George Floyd, or for the death of George Floyd, back in the spring of 2020. Now, many people are wondering, what are they saying in the courtroom? Some of this stuff is kind of technical. Some of it is a little confusing. So I think Laurie and I decided, let's help folks out. Let's give them some of the information in a way that they can understand it. So I appreciate being here with you today, Laurie. I really am excited to learn whether anyone's called in.
Not yet, but I haven't given the number. So I'm going to give the number now, 952-946-6205. Again, that number is 952-946-6205. And the goal of our show is to just talk about it. You know, we want to get connected. We believe that racial healing, an essential part of that is making the connection through conversation and being respectful and learning from each other. So we want to open it up for folks to have that chance to share their ideas. It may be a reaction to any of the witnesses. It may be a reaction to the lawyers. It may be whatever that you want to say about this trial. We hear from you. And again, that number is 952-946-6205. In thinking back, and last week we focused more on the witnesses who were at the scene. Was there anything this week that struck you in thinking back on those witnesses?
Oh,
go for it.
I think the witness that really, I think if anyone left an indelible mark on us, it would have been the gentleman who was actually one of the first bystanders or first witnesses on the scene. And his name is eluding me, but it was the older gentleman.
It's funny, I had the same one. That was one that I thought about this last week. Charles McMillan. Yeah. He
was the first witness on the scene. And after officers had escorted George Floyd from across the street where he was sitting. Mm-hmm. Now, that gentleman had to pause, and he started crying on the stand when they showed the video again. And it just, you could see the grief.
Yeah.
He just left a very, very big impression on me that they said, let's take a 10-minute recess.
Yeah.
That's how powerful he was.
It really hit me as well. He was trying to tell George, you can't win. And yet when George responded, it was like, I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to breathe.
Right.
I'm just trying to breathe. I can't breathe, and I can't get up. I can't get up. And and you could see how this gentleman was really trying to work through keeping the peace. He was really trying to de-escalate the situation. And this is a man who lived through a lot of Jim Crow racism through the years.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, and trying to how do we just not, how can we all go home tonight was really his big. And he said to Chauvin, at the end of the day, you got to go home to your family safe, and I want everyone to go home to their family safe. Now I think in that moment did not feel safe. And did not feel safe around the police. But when he was able to get up on the stage, when he was, in the witness seat. On the stand. Yeah. When he was on the stand on the witness seat, he was able to say, I got to look at you today as a maggot.
Yeah.
And to me, it struck me as sometimes in the moment, we may be afraid to say something. We don't feel safe. And we feel uncomfortable. We can do our best to keep it safe for everyone, but there may come a time when you do feel safe that you can say more. And not to feel guilty that maybe in the moment when it was scary, I mean, this was a high, you watched a man die. I mean, this was a scary moment. And we may not have to watch a man die, but we can be in an uncomfortable situation and not know what to do, but try and keep the peace. But there can be follow-up. You don't have to stay in that place. If it's in your heart that something was wrong and you need to say something to someone, help support that opportunity to make it happen.
Right. And I think part of the challenge for all of us in this whole thing is that we've witnessed these things before in the past, and we've not seen these trials the way we see it today. Mm-hmm. We've not been able to sit in the courtroom and listen to the witness's testimony. And my biggest challenge is that I think about the Philando Castile trial and how former officer Yanez walked after shooting into a car with a child in it. And I'm not sure if I still have a little reluctance, and I'm sure there are a lot of other people in the African American community who witness these things who still have a little bit of reluctance that the result that we're expecting will be the result that we get.
Well, with that, why don't we go into our next segment and start off talking with about Chief Arredondo and how what he presented, which is one of the first times we've seen a police, be able to have testimony against a policeman. The blue wall may be coming down and telling the truth at this point about what did happen and why it happened, and at least hear from other policemen their reaction to what happened, which I think is very powerful. So if you have an idea that you want to share with us about that, or you want to talk with us, we're opening the lines, 952-946-6205. Call in. We want to talk to you. And stay with us. We'll be right back after some commercials, and we'll be starting to talk about this week's witnesses, and we'd love to have you be part of the conversation. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show. I'm Laurie Fitz, your host. And this morning's co-host and co-producer is Malissa Staten Adams, who is the president and executive director of the Staten Adams Diversity Institute. And we've been talking about racial healing, unconscious bias, and the Derek Chauvin case. And Malissa, you were starting to talk about law enforcement in our last segment. And we're going to go into talking about Chief Arredondo. But tell us more about your thoughts about law enforcement.
So at this point, as we watch this trial, it can be very traumatizing for people of color, specifically people in the African American community. And I can tell you that there are some rumblings in the African American community that This could possibly, with so much police. I'll play devil's advocate if I may. With so many police coming out and saying that Derek Chauvin was wrong, completely wrong, 100% wrong. It almost seems as if he could possibly be a scapegoat in this situation.
And
So
not have all of law enforcement take more ownership of the challenges that are taking place. Yeah.
yes, right? Because it's not just about this one man doing this thing. It's about policing in general,
And
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 that
and it needs to be changed. You know.
it needs to
Yeah,
change
yeah.
the use of force techniques. Honestly, there are some. Again, I'll play devil's advocate. There are some in the African American community who are talking about police abolishment
Yeah.
and
Well, they,
getting to the place where we have community involvement with policing our own communities,
and
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 for the lack of a better term.
and different kinds of, being able to hold people accountable besides use of force. How do
Right. And I
we?
like what you said when you said peace
Yeah,
officers.
we need to get back to peace officers who live in the community that are about creating peace. And talking about community, we do have a caller from South Minneapolis, and his name's Walt. Walt, thank you for joining us today.
Hello. Thank you for the program. I have a comment. Following the trial, I see a need for a change in culture, and it's a culture change of the whole society with respect to how much we love violence, and more specifically, the same thing within the police department. And as an example, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that in recent weeks, the prosecution has had several police officials testifying, or officers, not on the beat but higher up, for the case of for the prosecution, and two of them, at least, if not more, have acknowledged that citizens at a crime scene with cameras represent a threat to the police officers. Thank you, and I'll listen to your comments.
Oh, no. Stay with us. Stay with us. Melissa, why don't you go for it?
Oh my goodness. And it's true.
Yeah.
They are a threat, because that right there is holding people accountable.
But it's a good threat. It's like that good trouble threat. I mean,
It's like the good trouble that John Lewis spoke of.
Right. I mean, and we need, and I really appreciate what Walt said in terms of we need to look at violence and how we accept violence and how we perpetrate. Why a camera? There were two. He's right. There were two folks that did say that it could increase the potential violence, but several others did say that it's their right. I mean,
right. And I think in terms of it being a threat to police officers, I see a camera at a police scene as much as of a threat as I see a journalist at a police scene as a threat. It's a positive threat.
It's a way to hold people accountable.
They're holding people accountable.
And if you're not doing anything wrong, then it's not a threat.
Why are you right?
It's not
and
a
then
threat.
On top of that, how could a camera cause me to be violent?
Right.
So what it should do is say, "Oh, they're filming me. Let me pretend that I'm a good officer."
Or let them be a good officer. Let them, not need to have a camera make them pretend.
It reminds me of Three's Company, where Mr. Roper would look into the camera. Right? So it's just like that. If the camera's on, you smile, you
should, but let's take it up to another level where they should not be afraid of a camera because they've been trained. Remember how that woman said, "Well, wouldn't you be uncomfortable if someone was shouting at you and filming you?" And she said, "No, I had the right training. I had the right training, so I was confident in my choices."
Miss Genevieve Hansen.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, why is it a woman can have a camera being pointed at her and shouted at? She can keep doing her job. But why did these policemen get uncomfortable with children filming them?
Hey, I'll tell you this much. There are so many instances where people are pointing cameras and people are shouting. have you ever seen any of the reality housewife shows?
Well, yes, but hopefully
Right.
that's not reality on the
That's
typical
not
corner.
Those women are not distracted by the camera. I
No,
tell you that
no,
much. They're not distracted by someone shouting at them or cursing at them or calling them names,
no,
right?
no, and nor should one be. I mean,
Anyone be.
if you are doing your job, then you should not be afraid of being documented in what you're doing in your job. And
Right.
if you consider that video camera a threat, I'd encourage whoever is policing to do kind of a soul search.
Yeah.
Why are you worried about someone documenting? And I don't.
Right.
I think that it's almost the police not understanding that people can understand things can get out of control. We're aware of that. But this wasn't a situation where someone was out of control. This is a person that was
Laurie,
handcuffed with a knee to his back, cutting off his lung and his respiration ability.
I would even push back on things getting out of control. The officers are the ones who escalate these situations,
or can escalate. Yes,
right.
And they should be. They have been trained to de-escalate, but it obviously did not happen in this situation.
And I don't want to say that all officers are doing this. I just want to say that, when we get into these situations, there is a choice that we can make.
Mm-hmm.
We can step into this situation as a learner, or we can step into this situation as a judger, judging everything. So for Mr. Chauvin to walk up to the car with his gun drawn to a closed window, right?
Right.
The window of the car wasn't
and
even
it gets
open
back
yet.
to what Walt said in terms of glorifying violence. I mean, that's kind of a John Wayne glorifying violence. I'm going to pull out my gun and show I'm the top gun. Oh, we have another caller. Lynette is calling in. Lynette didn't get to call in last week. So Lynette, I'm so glad that you get to call in this week. Lynette, how are you? Oh, and we lost her. Poor Lynette. She's gonna stop calling us because she's not gonna be able to get through. But
she's probably shy.
Well, no, she's not. We'll get Lynette back.
And I think part of what we want to think about too, as we look at this whole situation, how will this trial impact policing of the future?
Right. And will it?
Right.
Will people? Will this be a heads up? And I believe if there is a powerful enough. First, I hope that the jurors do the right thing and find him guilty. That's my personal opinion. And when they do, I hope that there's a penalty that's so large that people will think about that as they're doing their policing and use this as a cautionary tale of you do not want to be doing this kind of crap.
I also want to bring up the fact that we knew this was going to come up. The defense argued that, over and over has argued that George Floyd's underlying medical problems and the drugs in his system were responsible for his death. And I just want to make a note to everyone that's listening. Chauvin's actions to subdue Floyd is what killed him.
Yeah, and it's what even the medical examiner said. The cause of death was a homicide. This was not, a heart attack because of his bad heart or the drugs that were in his system. And they said very clearly that if he had not had, if a person would have died no matter if they had those underlying conditions or not, with the lack of oxygen that was being presented by having his knee on his neck and his back. We have Lynette back. Lynette, are you with us? Lynette,
I'm with you.
You are.
No.
I appreciate your perseverance.
Oh, well, technical difficulties happen. I understand.
Well, Lynette, please share with us. What's your thoughts?
Well, I saw a news story a few nights ago, and the St. Paul Police Department was wanting more women to be involved in their police department. And, watching the Derek Chauvin thing, I was thinking the same thing. I thought, maybe if there would have been a woman police officer there, maybe it would have made a difference because, the first thing that I saw, that's the most heartbreaking to me, is when George Floyd is in his car, and of course Derek Chauvin's coming up there with a gun, completely surprising people who wouldn't be surprised by that. And he's not a threat at all. In fact, it's just he really, he's just so scared.
Yeah.
He's just so frightened. I mean, it's just how you can look at that situation and that man and go, oh, well, God, now I got to get in control. Because it's just like, find out what's going on here. I mean, like, okay, we got the bill. No one even looked at the bill. I mean, it was just so crazy from the very beginning. It was total escalation. And I like to think that if there was a woman police officer there, maybe, someone could just ask a question like, hey, what's going on here? How are you doing? Because he just needed to be spoken to instead of just...
Well, what's interesting to me is the young man that took the $20 bill. He went out there twice. He's not a big guy, and he had no problem communicating with him. He wasn't afraid of him. He kind of felt bad, like, I don't know if he really knows that this $20 bill is a forgery. I'd probably I want to let him know that this isn't good to be doing this. He was doing it with a heart of trying to help him, and I can't imagine what he feels, and I do believe the community needs to support that young man and the trauma he's going through in being part of something that he feels, that he could not imagine that a man would die because of a $20 bill. But my point is that he went out to the car, and so why is it that he could go out and have a conversation and the law enforcement couldn't? And aren't they supposed to be trained to have these conversations? What pressure are we putting on these clerks and folks to make these kinds of decisions about what to do? I think that needs to be looked at as much as the law enforcement needs to be looked at. Why do we expect? I mean, it is illegal to charge that back, but he was threatened that if he didn't get it straightened out, it would be taken out of his paycheck. But to your original point, I would hope that a woman would be able to do a better job in creating a connection and communication. However, I also felt really bad that the woman who was there wasn't being listened to. So, can the woman be respected in the team? There was a team of 4 there. Would she have been better heard? With a group?
Right.
Maybe. I would hope she would, because she's, wearing the blue. But who knows? The woman who was saying, hey, I'm a first responder, I can help, she was being dismissed.
Well, maybe if there was more women there than just one woman and 3 men. Because I think that's what the point of the news story I was saying is they just realize that women are better communicators and men sometimes are just not. And unfortunately,
I think part of it too is, I don't know if it's about the genders, but I do know that you brought up a great point, Lynette, asking a question. When we see the car door closed and we see that gun come out, what question did you ask him that made you feel you needed to draw your gun? No question was asked. When we go into situations like this, in any situation, each of us has a choice to be a learner or a judger. A judger goes in and they're gun drawn, the door's still closed, the window's still up. I got my gun out because I know something's wrong here and I'm going to solve this problem with this gun. And a learner goes to that door, taps on the window and says, excuse me, roll down your window, sir. That's a formality. Roll down your window, sir. Yes, we need to talk to you. Could you step out the car?
But I also
think
think
questions.
It's part of the fear thing. Why did he automatically go into the fear where he had to show that he had power? And
that's it.
And why can't there be power in communication? Why can't there be power in seeking to understand? And maybe I'm wrong, but I do think women tend to, maybe it's because we're not listened to, that we want to be heard and we want to hear others. We know what that feels like. And so we reach out and want to connect more. But it's sad.
The women do have a tendency to want to build more connection. And part of that is in asking questions. That's how we get connected to other people.
Yeah.
Right. But I see Chauvin's actions as sort of that John Wayne shoot first and ask questions later kind of.
Yeah.
Why was the gun out?
Yeah.
Is my question, right?
Well, we have another caller. I'm going to have Catherine. I wonder if this is Catherine, who is my nurse that gave a shot to my husband. Is it Catherine? Is that you?
It sure is, Laurie.
Oh, Catherine. Catherine, first, thank you for all that you do. We appreciate that.
Yes, Catherine, thank you.
It's an honor. Thank you so much, Laurie. I just want to reach out to you and Jess. It was quite a pleasure working with you.
Well, you were so helpful, and you had such an ease in educating, and you made the experience very, very exciting and very happy for my husband. He was just, as you could see, very excited to get his shot. So thank you for that.
And can I say, if you're reluctant to get the vaccine, you see people like Catherine are out there to help us.
Yes.
I've got my shot. I am a proponent for getting the shot. If you've got a chance to get the shot, please go down and get that shot so that we can all be vaccinated and get back to some sort of normalcy.
Catherine, would you like to give a shout out to anyone in our audience about coming down and getting a shot?
Definitely. I want to give a shout out to everybody. It takes all of us. It takes a village to get this pandemic under control. I'm very thankful. I'm very encouraged by the turnout that we're seeing at the centers where we're giving shout out. And if you have any issues you might have with the vaccine, we're ready to answer them. And people who need support, Laurie was there holding Jeff's hands right along. And we're going to make it easy for you. And like I said, everybody should come out and get the vaccine. And we're here. We're in this together.
Thank you, Catherine. And we're going to end this segment with Catherine's shout out to our audience to go get your vaccine. And you'll meet lovely people like Catherine. Catherine, thank you for all that you do. And we'll be right back after a few short commercials. Well, we're back. We have just about a little over a minute to wrap up our show. We have our co-host and co-producer, Malissa Staten Adams, who's the president and executive director of Staten Adams Diversity Institute. You can learn more about Staten Adams to go to statenadams.com. Melissa, we've got a minute. What kind of wrap-up do you want to do for this show? And I also want to let folks know next week we'll be continuing this conversation.
Just that. Stick with us.
Yeah.
Laurie and I are taking you on a racial healing journey. We'll have these conversations, and we would love for you to join us. Just keep calling in and keep learning, keep reaching out, keep trying to be a better person.
And this week's going to be a tough one. We may have the defense starting. And it may be difficult to hear some of the unconscious bias. It may be re-traumatizing or traumatizing as we watch it. But do your best to stay healthy, stay centered, stay well, and stay with us, like our friend Melissa said. Come back with your ideas, your conversations, your reactions, and next week we'll continue our conversation about racial healing and learning to have the good conversation. Have a great week, and we'll be back next.